With each series, I consider them one story. So the entire Black Magician trilogy was originally one book that got divided up. But since then I learnt about, in writing that, I learned where to break the story. And so the Age of the Five was, I still see as one big story, but in three parts. The Trader Spy trilogy, again, it may be a big story, but it's in three parts. Um, I write an outline. The luxury of the first series was that I could just write it and then change it and make it work and learn with that series. But once you have a publisher and you put in a submission, a proposal for a next series, you have to have a synopsis, you have to have the whole thing outlined, you have to know what you're doing. Um, and that's fine with me because I now work really well that way. I outline everything. I even outline a scene before I write it. So I sit down and I write a quick 2 or 3 paragraphs on what I'm going to do. And I have a rest and I come back and I write the scene. And that helps a lot with RSI. If I'm not writing things I have to delete later, it really helps with the wear and tear on the hands. So yeah, I'm very much when I come to write the book, I'll start at the start and I write chapter by chapter by chapter by chapter to the end. I don't tend to write separate scenes and then plonk them together. But I suppose the process of coming up with the story does tend to be scene. Like we talked about that first chapter in the Black Magician trilogy. There was a scene about midway through the second book, and then of course there was the ending. And so every time I had an idea of a pivotal event, quite often I put them together, and then it's like a Minesweeper where you click on it and suddenly all the squares just gone. It's like the opposite to that. Suddenly I put the two things together and they sort of automatically form how I'm going to get from there to there. So I hope that answers the question.
A Little Britain asked, do you see sexism in the publishing and science fiction and fantasy industry?
Oh, I do and I don't. It's a very complicated situation because the publishing industry includes things that aren't publishing industry. I think publishers tend to publish the best things they find, but they're also influenced about what the reader wants. And if the audience, doesn't buy as many of a certain kind of book, they won't necessarily commission it. And they'll still commission that sort of thing, but not as much of it because they're not going to sell as much of it. I also think the more pressure is put on the publishing industry, the safer choices they will make. So you will find less diversity comes out of that. They will choose the sort of things they know will sell, but they won't take as many risks. What annoys me, I think, it's not even anything that annoys me. It's just, it does seem to be that in the reviewing world, and that's print media right through to blogs, there just does seem to be more male reviewers and more attention paid to books by men. And I think it's very complicated why that happens. I know I tend to get, I get frustrated by the idea that, a male writer will write something that the ideas in it are really out there. Whereas I find that women writers tend to write ideas that are subtle, they're very cleverly done. And the cleverly done stuff, and I'm generalising here because it can be the other way around as well, obviously. But in general, the clever stuff, the subtle clever stuff, doesn't tend to get the attention. So I find that even as a reader, when I'm reading books, if someone's ideas are brashly out there, I'm not as impressed as the person who just weaves that idea in there so cleverly and subtly that you afterwards you think, wow, that was just, I didn't feel like I was being beaten around the head by that idea. And I think that's what frustrates me because I know I tend to write books that I'm deliberately trying to make them accessible as possible because I'm writing for the 14-year-old in me in some ways, without dumbing things down. I would never say that if you're writing for 14-year-olds, you must dumb things down, but some people say you're writing for the 14-year-old and you might assume that. But I want it to be easily consumed. I want it, easy reading is hard writing, very, very hard. I work really, really hard to make it as easily readable as possible. So that I read lots of people, and then you don't tend to get attention for that sort of thing. So if it's an easy read, people just assume it's just no substance to it. Anyway, it's not always true.
Yeah, I find that your books are easy to read as opposed to something like A Song of Ice and Fire by George R. R. Martin, which I wouldn't say language-wise is difficult, but content-wise it can be quite challenging. Yours are not as confronting, and yet you're dealing with issues like drug addiction and gender issues, and your characters have conversations about philosophy and so on.
Yeah, I haven't read any of George R. R. Martin's books, but I must admit I saw the series, television series, and now I'm a little bit worried about reading the books because, I mean, I look at it and I think, okay, it's a thing of its time, and I certainly know that back in the 90s, people were writing female characters. They're writing strong female characters that were wielding swords and were fierce mothers and things like that. So it's all these cliches of the 90s are all in the series. And I'm sort of thinking, well, I've moved on since then, I'm not impressed by that anymore. I want to see real characters. My favourite authors at the moment, new ones, are N.K. Jemisin and Kate Elliott. And they're just, those characters are so real to me, whereas I found, when things get translated to TV, it often oversimplifies things anyway. So I found with the George R. R. Martin, the Game of Thrones, that the characters that I least liked were often the ones that other people who'd read the books most liked. So I know it's probably just didn't translate very well.
Well, the TV series was different. My absolute favourite character from the books and the TV series is Tyrion, but I felt especially in the second season he got dumbed down. And my second two favourite characters were like Jon Snow and Arya.
Okay.
I know a lot of people love Sansa, but I don't have a lot of time for her. But yeah.
Yeah. I felt sympathy with Jon Snow, but I didn't see... I remember turning to Paul and saying, so why does his mother hate him? Is it just because he's the bastard? He said, yeah.
Yeah.
Have a bit more complexity in here, please. But I'm a demanding reader. Once you start writing, I think I went through a phase where I couldn't read another book without putting my critical brain in gear. And now I've actually reached a point where at first that was a bit sad, but now I like it because when I read something that's really good, I can really appreciate why it's good.
Yes. If you could be any of your characters, which one would you choose? This question is from Keith Mackey.
A lot of people have asked me if I am Sonia, and I say I'm not because I'm a complete wuss and she is feisty. And a very cliche terminology there, feisty, but she fights back. She stands up for herself. She's tougher than I am. I'd like to be that tough.
Keith also asks, would you like to collaborate? And if so, with whom? Now, you have to be really careful when you answer this. There's a catch. He says that if you say Raymond Feist, he's divorcing his wife and living on your pavement till the book comes out. He did add a lol, though, so he might just be the first in queue to purchase the book.
Okay. I hope Raymond knows this. Actually, I've never wanted to collaborate. I tried once. I had a pen pal when I was about 16, and that was a lot of fun. We'd send, chapters back and forth to each other, and I got really, really mad with him because he kept putting our characters in impossible situations just to see how I'd get them out. They're in a cave and it's under the water and they can't possibly swim out, and I was, why? Just make them go on an adventure.
So he was actually torturing you.
Yeah, probably. Thanks, Paul. But no, I sort of have no... I suppose maybe if it was one of those collaborations where you get together and you come up with your ideas and then someone goes away and writes it, maybe. But I've never had any particular desire to write with somebody else. I suppose there's a little bit of me that says I would probably spoil their story. I'm not worthy.